Hello and welcome to The Price of Football, the show that looks at the money behind a beautiful game with me, Kevin Day, and Liverpool University's Kieran Maguire. So that was rather a chipper opening there. It's far more chipper than I feel. Hello and welcome to, I said, hello, welcome to The Price of Football. This is a special interview, Kieran. Pat Nevin, I think definitely one of my favourite footballers, Kieran, and I'm sure one of yours, and also somebody whose cultural and political outlook I think we share to some degree. Former Chelsea player, of course, Everton player, Scotland winger, PFA chairman, Radio 5 Live summariser, author, and his particular latest book is Football and How to Survive It. But we were more interested in his time at Motherwell, Kieran, when he was chief executive at Motherwell at a time of great financial difficulty, and that's something we concentrated on, or tried to concentrate on, and then we ended up talking about music and Norman Whiteside in the way these things go. So this is what Pat had to say. Thank you so much for joining us today. Normally, we ask our guests to give a brief introduction to themselves before we start, but you're Pat Nevin, so I don't think we need to do that, really. We'll just go for the coolest footballer of his generation, if that's all right, and crack on.
I'll take that. I'm sure I don't deserve it, but I'll take it.
Pat, we talked about the book on the pod earlier, and it's I know it's a brilliant read. Frustratingly, it's wrapped up under my Christmas tree at the moment, so I haven't read it all the way through. I'm about to do it at Christmas. But just to start, we've had player managers. We're used to that. We've had player coaches. But I think I'm fairly safe in saying that you're the only ever player chief executive the game has ever seen. How did that come about?
Well, certainly player chief exec at the top role, at the top level of football, particularly Scottish football, in this case with Motherwell. No, it's coming to the end of my career. And I'd done other jobs. Obviously, I'd been PFA chairman, which is a serious job. You know, you're involved in every level of football there. You're involved in, how the monies are paid for television deals. You're involved in all the legal stuff about contracts. It's a big old thing. And my background obviously was I'd been doing a degree when I was younger in economics, accounts and business studies. So I've got the background to know how to do this stuff. But then it's the jumping in at a deep end when I was coming near the end of my career, and a chap who I'd actually known a little bit in London, and he'd run these, they'd call them bucket shops in those days, old travel agencies. And he'd asked me to do him a couple of favours a couple of times, and just to help the business along, just come and play in a couple of football games. Anyway, years later, he asked me to come and run a football club if he managed to buy it. And the first time he did this, I was 26 and I was playing for Everton, and he wanted to buy this football club. And anyway, long story short, which is in my first book, actually, The Accidental Footballer. Long story short, I didn't realise the club he was trying to buy, it was Celtic. And he wanted me to be chief executive of Celtic at the age of 26, in the middle of my career, while being a kind of an international player. And it's a great story. And again, it's in my first book. It was out a couple of years ago. And I liked your reaction there. You went, what? Which was my reaction at the time as well. Anyway, he never got to buy Celtic, this guy. But 7 or 8 years later, he ended up buying Motherwell. But this time I was back in Scotland playing for Kilmarnock. And he said, do you want to come and either do whatever you like, basically. So come and play for the team, I'll buy you. Would you like to be a manager? And I said, no, I'm not interested in being a manager. But would you like to oversee the entire club? Because he didn't know anything about football at all. And I said, yeah, okay, I'll do that. That sounds... I said no at first. And then after a little bit of persuasion, I thought, actually, this could be weird. And I didn't take it I didn't take it frivolously. But what an extraordinary thing to do. And I was still playing the first team. And of course, there's this strange, weird situation, which I'm sure you would get onto in a moment or two, where I'm chief exec, I choose the manager, but then the manager decides whether I play or not. So you've got this really weird, most business structures are pyramids, and this is a weird one of my own making. But it worked for a reason. That side of it worked for a reason, purely because I chose a manager and then said to him, I am the one player who can't bang on your door and say, I demand a game. And the reason is, I have chosen you and you're my decision and I will trust your decisions. If I'm not in your team, then I have to accept that. And when we understood that, the manager and I were absolutely fine with it, except the git hardly ever played me.
So the chap who bought this is John Boyle we're talking about, and I'm wondering what sort of favours you must have done for him at an early age that he asked you to take over Celtic for him. So Motherwell then was a kind of consolation prize for him, was it, or was he a local lad? Was Motherwell his club? Was that always his aim?
Well, first of all, I'll tell you the favours with John Boyle. His companies, he used to buy other companies. So I think he had Falcon Travel and he bought another one. And when he's buying up this next company, he wants to show the new company that he's buying into that he's quite cool. So he put on a football game, a wee 7-a-side or whatever football game. But add a bit of pizzazz. I'd done the same degree as him, but a few years later. And a lot of the people that worked for the company were in my degree course. So he'd asked them if I could come along and just turn up and kick a ball about. And the thing is, it's actually very, very important to the story, because I would then, so their company was based in Notting Hill Gate. I ended up living about a half a mile away from there, down Ken High Street. And you go up on a Friday night and the entire company was out having a drink on the chairman, on the owner, Boyle. He just took care of people, took care of his workers. So I would never have considered doing the job, except this guy had a very unusual attitude towards the workforce, i.e., we'll take care of you, we're mates. If there's, a lot of money made, you all share in it. Everything that you would do to keep a workforce cool and happy. So when he did come back in all those years later, and the reason why he asked me is because he knew I'd done the same degree. He knew I'd been chairman of the PFA, which is a huge job, and I knew about football. So, I ticked a lot of boxes, to be fair. And when I kind of commented out, I just explained to him, look, I've got interesting ways of thoughts of running a business, but they seem to equate to how you look at it. And because of that, I'll have a go. And we'll see how we can get it to work. And to be fair, it worked really well at the start, really well. It flew at the start.
Yeah. I understand that he asked you, when he bought Motherwell, he asked you for 3 separate costing options. Is that so? Do you remember what they were, these costing options?
Yeah, he actually didn't ask them. He said, look, could you have a look at the club? And I said, look, I'll have a look for a month. It's kind of hard when you're playing football. You look for a month, but you're looking at the structure of the club, you're looking at where the costs are, you're looking at where the incomes are, you're looking at where the standard of everything from the playing. Everyone will just look at the playing staff, obviously, but it's not that. It's where the costs are hidden. It's where you can actually go back and get some more money in other areas. Is there anything out with the club? So the whole structure of how a business should work. A month to have a quick overview. And I said to him, look, I'll come back with 3 options. And he said, that's fine. And I come back with 3 options, and the 3 options were pretty simple. They were broad brush, because you have to do that in such a short period of time. And the first one was keep on spending the money that you're roughly spending, i.e. he'd just taken over the club. I knew that wasn't going to be the case because he'd made big promises in the press, which I immediately told him to stop doing, because that's not a good thing to do in football. The first one, the other one was, look, if you basically plough in and make losses of £1 million a year, I'll get you safety in the top level at Scotland, and we can start building a youth department that's much better, etc. And structure the club in a great way that, over time, 5-10 years, it can be a really interesting ongoing concern. And I said, well, I'll give you the third option as well. The third option is like 2 million a year, which I would urge you not to do. From that, I can get you probably third, fourth place. And you can't beat Celtic and Rangers because they've got 20 times what you've got. It's just money. You can't get to them. And if you get near them, you get near them briefly. So anyway, I told them that for 2 million quid a year, which I urge you not to do, I can get you that, and I can get you that fairly quickly. And that didn't make us the third biggest spenders. Nowhere near it. Absolutely nowhere near it. Made us fifth or something like sixth. But, if you organise it in a good way, I felt we could do that. And immediately he said, yeah, we'll go for the 2 million a year. I went, what? Are you mad? I said, don't do that. I said, I'm just telling you this is what it costs to get to these three different areas. Now, 2 million, that's losses. That's overspend. So you're not talking a mass, because, the business is bringing in a lot more money. Obviously we get television monies, we get gate receipts, all that sort of stuff. And the company was running roughly at even keel at that point in time. So, but I think he'd come in and he wanted to have an impact. To answer your earlier question, which I'm not ignoring, why did he do it? Why did he choose Motherwell? Well, he said at the time that that was his boyhood club. And that may well be the case. But, he certainly fell, like a lot of people, he certainly fell in love with the club quite quickly. Football's really, it's a very unusual business. People think you take over a football club and it's like every other business. And there's a lot of differences in football. I mean, a hell of a lot of differences in football. It doesn't, I studied marketing, I did all that. Some of the stuff that we put in place, which should have an uplift and make the footfall bigger, had a negative effect, like increasing the quality of the product. So it should be better. The fan base went down.
Yeah, it's odd. We interviewed a friend of mine yesterday who moved to Portugal and became involved in a Portuguese 4th Division club. And my friend is an astute businessman who knows all about football, but is just totally bamboozled within 2 weeks by the business of running a football club, even in the Portuguese 4th Division. So you found yourself in this situation, and you say it went very well at the start, but I remember a heartbreaking photograph of you looking shell-shocked, sitting on the steps of Thur Park after you resigned when the club went into administration. What were the circumstances of that administration? And you've said it recently that you still think that was a mistake, even this 21 years afterwards. You say that was still a mistake. Do you still believe that it was a mistake for that club to go into administration?
Yeah, to be honest, lots of reasons why I write the last couple of books I've written, and certainly a big part of writing the most recent one, which is Football and How to Survive It. And if you look at that picture, you can tell I barely survived it.
Yeah.
And I demanded that picture was in the book to underline to people the stress and the way it can push you right to the edge. By the way, I'm not devastated for me there. I'm actually quite happy for me. I'm in a great position because I've got other jobs to go to. I've got other things to do. I just felt as if the people that I had worked with in the club had been let down. And obviously I was fearful of people losing their jobs, etc. And I'd spent these 4 years, and people think, people want binary simplistic answers, don't they? It makes life easy. And you say, do you think it was a good or a bad decision, right or the wrong thing to do? And wouldn't it be lovely if you could say yes and no there, eh? Wouldn't life just be dead easy? But it really depends on what perspective you're looking at it from. So the perspective I was looking at it from, very openly, was, right, okay, he'd ploughed a lot of money in. Obviously something had gone wrong with his other businesses, and there was a massive thing had gone wrong in football in Scotland. The television deal had fallen through, and what was going to be a 60 million deal became a 12 million deal. And you can imagine trying to run your businesses, which is already running at a loss, for that to happen. So that was kind of disastrous, really. That was kind of hard for him. But what I'd done is I'd decreased the costings back down again. We were back onto roughly the keel that we'd been on before. He'd lost a lot of money, but I'd explained to him he was going to do that. That's if you're going to spend the money, you're going to spend the money. You don't get it back in football most often. But when it was coming to that time where obviously they were looking at administration and I was trying to cut the costs, I did cut them roughly by half. That sounds easy, doesn't it? Trust me, it isn't, right? It's really not. And while you're trying to play Celtic and Rangers, etc., and be competitive. But I knew, or didn't know, but I suspected something like that could happen right from the start. If you're going to be involved in business, you need to be strategic. You need to have long-term plans. You need to have your what-if plans. And I had the what-if plan. So I had a buyer waiting in the wings. So, because I knew that was going to happen. And the buyer was very keen to get involved. Again, he wanted to keep me. I didn't actually particularly want to stay at that point, but I would have. So from my point of view, it didn't need to go into administration. They could sell it. I had a buyer. But they couldn't come to an agreement. And when they went into administration then, the owner just said he wanted me to stay on. He was desperate for me to stay on and, work for the new method out of administration. But I just morally couldn't do that. So, and simply the morality is I'm not watching people get sacked and I'm walking up with a big pay packet in my back pocket. I just don't do that. It's not my morality. And I'd always say to him from day one, I had very unusual ways of doing it, very unusual business methods, which was when offered a contract as an executive, I refused and said, if you want me to leave, I will walk out the next day. If I want to leave, I will walk out the next day. We don't need a contract. Not many executives down that road, do they?
No, they don't. No. When you say they couldn't reach an agreement about the sale of the club, was that purely on the price that John Boyle wanted for the football club?
Oh, I would love to know the answer to that question because, again, it's a big part of the book.
Oh, you don't know?
No, the big part of the book. What happened was these are two businessmen, remember? So I've managed to get them together when the administration's just beginning to crash down. And I get them together and I said, right, let's have this meeting now, see if we can slash it out. And both of them say, yeah, we'll go and have a meeting. You wait outside. I went, what?
Wow.
I'm not, I'm the guy who organised this. You don't expect me. And I sat outside thinking, if this guy buys it, I'm not staying. Because if you don't trust me to be in the meeting, and I thought, I'm not having that. And if you're an executive, you shouldn't have that. Anyway, they wanted to have their private meeting. Had the private meeting. Didn't last long. Came out and said, the guy who was going to buy it said, nah, he's changed the rules. I'm not having it. And walked away. So I never found out. Both of them just drove away. Would you believe it? And this is brilliant that we're chatting now. See the guy who was going to buy it. I'm trying to think how many years ago that is. 20 odd years. Yeah, maybe just about 2 decades ago.
Yeah, it's 2002, 21, yeah.
Met him again for the first time 2 weeks ago. And
wow.
And I mean, we never just met up again. I went in a very different direction. I went working in England and London and Dublin, and he's still up in Scotland. So, paths didn't cross. And then I was at a hotel with my wife in Glasgow just a couple of weeks ago. And I just thought, there's one damn question I need to ask you, mate. What happened in that meeting? Because it was never made clear to me. But do you know that thing where a social situation where you can't actually bring up business? It was one of them. And my wife standing there, and it was that kind of moment of, I'm dying to know what happened because I never found out. I mean, I can guess. I think we can all guess that, the previous owner, John Boyle, wanted to be, compensated for the value of the assets, that sort of stuff. Yeah, so I understand that, and I would get all that. And it may well be that just they were so far apart that it wasn't even worth pushing. And I'd say to John Boyle, look, if you want out, and you don't want any more debt piled on you, I've got a buyer. So I think initially he'd made it look as if he was happy to look right off the debts. But that's not what happens in business. We all know that's not what happens. So even though the fans are thinking, oh, it's crushed and there's no money, and I'm looking around thinking, well, that stadium's worth a good few million. Those players, which I know, there's a guy called James McFadden that was coming through, and I'm thinking, yeah, he's worth a couple of million on his own. I wish we'd clear the debts, just those two things, if you did. So complicated in those sort of situations, but I wasn't party to those. I wasn't allowed to be party to those sort of discussions. And I didn't demand I was, because it's not my place. If you feel I'm not to be involved in those discussions, then I don't want to work for you. Full stop. I'll go and work. And I had other jobs to do. I've got other strings to my bow.
If you don't mind me saying so, Pat, you always seem to be one of the most decent and sympathetic of human beings. So did you feel any sense of personal responsibility that people were losing their jobs, that the town was losing its football club? Were you able to sleep at night?
Number one, town was never going to lose its football club. Remember, I had a buyer, so don't worry. Never a moment's sleep left. People losing their jobs, if I felt as I had one tiny bit of responsibility for it, I couldn't have slept. But I didn't have any. And that's why the book was written, to explain to people that I'd come into this company, and the owners, they give you a budget. I explain why that budget's too much or too little, or try to hold back in it. From my position as an executive, I was the one who was dragging back the costings, dragging back the spending, trying to make sure you didn't get into trouble. Had I at any point done the opposite of that, then yeah, you're absolutely right. I'd have felt dreadful about it. So the people that were losing their jobs, I was gutted for them. But every one of them came up to me and said exactly the same thing. I'm not going to take another penny out of this. I'm not working for this, even though I could do. Morally, I can't do that. If you are all going to, or some of you are going to lose your jobs, I absolutely wouldn't do that. And I think they're some simple, and to my point, a very, very good point from them was, well, this guy's still worth tens of millions of pounds, and he's written up our contracts. What's going on here? Morality's not getting pushed on somebody like me, because I'm not worth tens of millions of pounds, I can promise you, and I'm not the owner. And that was the fury. And I think it's a business thing that a lot of people within business think. It's the business, tough luck with people that have got contracts or whatever, if the business is put in administration, they just shrug their shoulders and move on. And as quite a few of the players at times said to me, yeah, but he's going to go back to one of his loads of mansions. And he's got that tonight. We have no jobs. We're out of it. And that's why in a moral situation, I felt bad for them. I was gutted for them. I'd fought and done everything I could for them. And again, the story of this book, which is is the amount of people that have told me that it reads like a thriller. And it was meant to be. I wrote it that way. But, that sounds like, oh, I'm great and the others are bad. It ain't like that. Really isn't like that. I don't write like that because that's not what life's like. Is underlining from the businessman's perspective. I'll give you that. I'll absolutely give you that with honesty. And people always want this binary, I hate you, you're terrible, I'm great, all that. Don't get that from me, because that's pathetic and simplistic. And the amount of people the vast majority of people come up to me and said, either, God, you let John Boyle off light in that book, or, my God, you were fair to him. You were absolutely fair. Of course I'm fair. You should be fair, because it's too self-indulgent not to be. So, in the simplest terms, did I ever lose any sleep about it? Actually, no. Did I ever feel any guilt about it? I'm afraid not a smidge. And I felt guilty about plenty of things that I've done wrong in my time. Don't worry about that. But that one, no.
I want to bring Kieran in here, Pat, because what you've just told us, is a theme of the pod and has been for 4 years, Kieran, in that here you have a businessman, somebody who's clearly a good businessman because he's got the money to buy Motherwell Football Club. He's being advised by Pat not to spend this money, and yet goes ahead, spends the money that ends up putting the club into administration. What comes over businessmen, Kieran, when they suddenly take over a football club? Is it simply that they don't realise football is like no other business?
Yes, they think they have transferable skills. They think that because they've been successful in property, they've been successful in telephony, automobiles, whatever their background is, that all they've got to do is to run the football club in the same way. But football success is not measured in terms of financial returns on investment. It's measured on the pitch. And you therefore have that paradox of we saw in the Champions League final in 2021, the two clubs that had lost the most money in Premier League history were Chelsea and Manchester City. And there wasn't a single person in that stadium that was unhappy about it. The owners were getting glory. The fans were getting to see their heroes play at the ultimate level. And the players and managers were all being handsomely rewarded. But from a business school point of view, absolute disaster.
Mm. And Pat, Motherwell are fan-owned now. Is that a model of ownership that you approve of?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. It's probably not going to win you things in the bigger scheme of things. Well, it did kind of with Barcelona for a while, but then look where the business model, just as you were mentioning there, look where it goes. To actually win in the current business, the way football business is, you need huge sums of money. Now that, you might add another couple of zeros on the end if you're moving English football, Champions League football away from Scottish football. But it's the same gig. The people that spend the most money tend to win the tournaments in the short term. And that's just the way it is. I find the business of football, and always have found it incredibly interesting. You're talking about that game between Manchester City and Chelsea, and everyone was happy. Yeah, I was particularly happy. A, I was at the game. B, I was doing commentary and getting paid for it. And C, my team won. So I was kind of pleased with it. But I also understood that there was a business model that looked very, very unusual. Now, I've actually got quite a very different outlook. Now, people who know me know I'm kind of quite kind of social democratic type of person, right? But I actually look at it a slightly different way with football. Do you know the money that's been spent? They're trying to hide the monies that are being spent. Do you know if you could possibly simplify it in any way by the complicated business deals that they do? Actually, I don't care if you want to spend as much money as you want in the football club and go into massive debt. I don't think there should be any reason why that's not allowed. Actually, can I change that word? Not debt. I think you should be allowed to put as much cash, money, into a football club as you like. Be you Abu Dhabi, be you Qatar, be you at the time Russian oligarch, but that obviously doesn't happen now, or American conglomerates and that. I don't care, as long as it's not debt. If you say, right, I want to buy this football club and make it huge and spend £1 billion, spend it. Don't put it in debt. Spend it. I have no problem with that. The problem is the debt. And that is what is crushing a lot of those clubs. So you're absolutely right to say what was happening in Manchester City and Chelsea and others. My other team, my other love is Everton. And look at the problems they've had with the debt that's been set up. So financial fair play, I absolutely get it. But I would change that one rule and say, spend as much as you like, as long as it ain't debt. And businessmen look at you and go, well, why would we do that? I said, because the rewards of spending that money is what you wanted in the first place, which is the fame, which is the glory, which is to piggyback on the beauty of the game of football. And you shouldn't be getting that out of debt. That should cost you.
Mm-hmm. Pat, we talked about you being the only player stroke chief executive. Why do you think so few ex-footballers end up in the boardroom? I mean, there's a lot of talk. We'll come on to the PFA and your role in it in a moment. There's a lot of talk about what footballers do with the rest of their life, and they tend to go into coaching or into media. But why do so few of them end up in the business side at the sharp end, do you think?
Well, just what we mentioned a few minutes ago about transferable skills. What are the transferable skills? And sometimes being a winner, that sort of stuff that people are talking about, that might be something. But in actual fact, if you play football, you've probably, unlike me, I was quite unusual because I'd studied other stuff and I'd had a hinterland and a different life out with football as well. But if you're going to be a top level footballer, what are you going to spend your time doing? You're going to spend time training. It should be training. You should have a lot of the time, a lot of the players, especially back in the day, they weren't really sticking to their studies in school because they had one dream. Everyone always talks about they have the dream of being a footballer. So you do the 10,000 hours and a bit more. So by the time you come 33, 34, 35, to suggest that you should then go and be a high power executive and, you might lack some of the skills and you've got a lot of learning to do. Now, in actual fact, as PFA chairman and our union, what we try to do is we try to make sure that the players were given the opportunity to learn a load of these skills while they were playing so that we could push this on. And certainly it's worked for a number, but they are quite behind the curve. When you get to that age, 35, 36, 37, you have knowledge of certain areas. But I was unusual that, I knew every area of it purely, other than management, I knew every area of it because I'd been on every single committee at every level in England and in Scotland. That's unusual. That's really, because the rest of them I'm painting one side of the picture. The other side of the picture is there's a few of them out having a drink, and enjoying life and doing the things that young men do when they've got a few quid. So I was a wee bit more earnest when I was younger. But you're right, getting back to the transferable skills, I love that conversation. I love that conversation about business people coming in. And from time immemorial, whether it was the baker who used to come in or the local steel manufacturer or whatever came in, and then it was, people that were involved in different bigger businesses. And now it is, it's city states, it's, it's massive, massive, massive companies. It's all the same problems. It's all the same things.
Yeah,
they're not actually that different. They all still know that they know better, when in actual fact they don't a lot of the time. Every single thing that they've learned in their part of their industry is better than football because football's stupid. And football eats these people up and always has.
Yeah. I remember talking to Steve Coppell, or as we Palace fans call him, Saint Steve Coppell. And he talked about how frustrated he used to get as a player because people were baffled by the fact that he had a degree and that he read newspapers and took an interest in the wider world around him. Was that your experience? Did you find that people treated you slightly differently as a footballer because you had, as you say, this hinterland and you had this wider cultural frame of reference?
Yeah, you got a little bit of it. But again, that's the first book was a lot about that. The accident of football was to say, right, okay, I've become a footballer. I actually hadn't tried to become a footballer. I know that sounds really weird, so it took a whole book to explain how I managed that one. But you come in and you are different. Now, let's be fair. I mean, how many other outsiders are there in every other work? Now, if you listen to this podcast today, you might feel a little bit of an outsider in certain areas of your work. But you can still go to work, and being a footballer, I mean, one of the lines I often used was, being a footballer is what I did. It's not who I am or who I was. So you go in, you do the job the best you can. You mingle perfectly well with the rest of the players. You might not share interests with them, but how many other people in jobs do? Everybody else in the office. So I was very comfortable. I liked footballers as a general breed. We didn't share the same frames of reference. I mean, a classic one of the favourite ones was, I used to read quite a lot of heavy literature and still do, but then when I was younger, a lot more. So they're up playing cards and I'm reading Dostoevsky and Gogol down at the front, right? and classically, I'm sitting at the front one day and one of our lads, who's no longer with us anymore, Dale Jasper, he's walked on the coach and he's looked at my book. He's went, bloody hell, Patsy, I know one of your authors. And I'm looking at my book and it's like the short stories of Anton Chekhov. And I'm going, really? I didn't know you were into Russian literature. I said, sit down, have a chat. He sat down and his first words were, yeah, Patsy, always liked Chekhov, but I didn't know you'd been to Star Trek. Nah, it's not that Chekhov. So that sums it up really. And to underline the other bit of it, they all called me, for when I was at Chelsea at the start, my nickname was Weirdo, right?
Oh, wow.
But I was absolutely and utterly convinced, and still am, that they were the ones that were weird and I'm the one that's quite normal.
Yeah. I remember seeing an interview with Roy Hodgson where he said he learned quite early on in the managerial process not to use Russian literature as a motivation tool for the players. You mentioned the PFA, Pat, and your role as chair back in the 90s. How much do you think the role of the PFA has changed since then? And how much has its funding model changed since then? It's a bigger, more well-organised beast, I imagine now, isn't it?
Well, first of all, when you don't know something, put your hands up and say you don't know. I don't know how the model works actually just now, because you need to be within that organisation to know. What I have seen over the years, certainly when I was there and after I was there, a lot of people from the outside telling everybody how badly this was run, what it was doing wrong, why it was such a terrible organisation. And it almost always is done from a position of extraordinary ignorance, because they don't understand and know the works that are done within the PFA and the huge sums of money spent in the PFA on fantastically good, not just causes, but things that are good for the good of the game. And it started up incredible things. So certainly what was originally argued for by Gordon Taylor and won was a percentage of the television monies. Or not a percentage, but a right to the percentage of the television monies. Now, that used to be not a lot of money. That is now billions, right? So the organisation became bigger because it became, and stronger because it became wealthier. But it was to use those funds in the right ways. And for all the stuff that's been said, and everybody makes mistakes along the way, and there are good and bad actors in every single organisation. But I could sit here for the next 2.5 hours and tell you fabulous stories about the good that the PFA has done, be it from pushing the anti-racism agenda before anyone even noticed or bothered with being there, for re-education, for, I say in one of the books, I say that I was going to do a whole chapter in the PFA and saying, it does, especially like pensions and things like that, actuarial valuations of pension schemes, the sort of stuff that it sounds like dry, dull, boring work. And that's only because it's dry, dull, boring work. But it's incredible the work that's actually been done within that organisation. I'm not saying everything's perfect about it. The model now, I'd be quite intrigued to know more about. Certainly one or two people, because remember, I was chairman. That's an unpaid role. I've never been paid by the union. And a number of people have suggested to me a few years back that I should maybe go back and get involved again. But no, you move on. There's other things you could do. And I just hope that the union continues to, where it fights over the decisions that have to make, and the world's a more complicated place now, especially with the PR situations that you find within the men's game, the women's game, the subtleties between. Certainly, as long as the finances have been moved in the right way to help those that made the game great originally.
Pat, we've seen great improvement in the last few years in the way that 16, 17, 18-year-olds are treated when they're rejected by a club at the end of their youth term. Do you think football does enough, though, for those players who leave the game at the age of 33 and 34, who still have 30 years of employability? Because it seems to me that there are so many players that are kind of left a little bereft, and left a little without support when they leave a job. I've spoken to quite a few footballers and cricketers who they can't adjust to coming into civilian life, for want of a better word. Do you think football does enough to help those?
The opportunities are there. It's whether they take them at the right times. It's as simple as that. I spent an entire career obviously I had other things, and for the whole time through my career, I mean, I was 19 years a pro, and as long I underlined to myself, it's what I do, it's not who I am. So when I left, I'll go and do another job. Now, if it's driving a taxi, it's driving a taxi. It's okay. I've not got the ego to think that's a step down, And whereas if you're a footballer or a famous person, you're expecting, everything's been done for me forever. No, you shouldn't. You've not got a right for that. No one's got a right for that. There's people who haven't got anywhere near the opportunities and the starts that you've had before. So yes, I've got sympathy because it's a hard transition for a lot of people. But the opportunities are there. In the PFA, we had every single opportunity for education. And the vast majority of players went, shut up, we're not interested, we're going for a drink. And I'm saying, well, you need to find out this later, mate, that you're going to need this. I started realising when I was working with the union or working with players that as an outsider, I'm looking at them thinking, when they all leave, 5 years after they've left, the likelihood is you'll be divorced, you've lost all your friends, you've lost all your backup. Quite a lot of times you've lost all your money. You might have an addiction on top of that as well. And I'm looking around saying, why can't you all see this? It's all around you. And and it's like the classic taking a horse to water. You can't make it drink. So you always make that water available. And that's what certainly in the early days of PFA did. To some degrees, the clubs have tried to do it as much as possible. Anybody who comes in to the game is given the educational possibilities. But some of them have limited capabilities. Others have great capabilities and don't use them. So, yes, I understand it and I have a lot of sympathy. But I'm not going to get all the violins out just for footballers and ex-footballers when there's plenty of other people in society have got bigger problems and didn't have the opportunities. And had they had the opportunities, they've used them right. One of the biggest buzzwords in not just business, but in life at the moment is resilience. And the least resilient people I know are the people that talk to me about resilience all the time. Resilience is, it's true. It's true. The people, what you have to be doing is, if you don't listen, you have to accept that I didn't listen, so I will go back and try and fix that when the time comes. So it sounds as if it's a lack of sympathy. It's not a lack of sympathy. But on the other hand, don't say, it's terrible, it's terrible, it's terrible, they never had a chance. That, I'm afraid, is not true. And it would be a lie to say otherwise.
Pat, I'm going to end with a question that I imagine you're probably asked about 4 or 5 times a day. But I want to put it into a bit of context. You were the first player who was subject to a transfer tribunal. I mean, when you moved from Clyde to Chelsea, because Chelsea offered 50,000, I believe, and Clyde wanted 200,000. You talked in your book about the fact that your first wage as a professional footballer was £35 a week. Do you regret missing out on the days of the huge pay packets for footballers, or do you rejoice that you played at a time when football seemed to be more fun than it is now for a lot of people in the game?
So all the way through that lovely question, and a very interesting question, which we could talk about forever, you said the most important word. And the most important word in there was fun, of all the other words. And I played football and only ever played it for the pure joy and love of the game. Now, that's okay for me because, that's why I did it. And I got pretty good at it to some degree. I had a 19-year career out of it, made some money. But I can't look at the modern player and say, how dare you? I mean, classically, I was player of the year twice at Chelsea, right? I played there for 5 years. I've also until recently wrote a column for their website. 17 years I wrote it every Monday, 1,000 words. I wrote for the programme. I worked for Chelsea TV for 13 years. If you add up all that money together, it doesn't come to 2 weeks' wages of one of the top modern players. So, am I embittered by that? The answer is not for a second, not for a millisecond, because I have to look back and think, wait a minute, what happened before me? Bobby Moore? Or, go all the way back, to the great players, Jackie Milburn, or phenomenal players in the past who got a fraction of what I got. That's just life. That's just economy. If you spend your time being embittered about what you should or shouldn't get or did or didn't get, I know many, many, many players who feel that way. It doesn't exist even slightly. And it's not, oh, it was a better time to play. This is not what I feel. It's just you have your time, you enjoy your time, you make the best of it, you move on and do the next thing. Anything else is just torture for yourself. And I try very hard to make sure players don't live in that tortured, ugly world because it's not healthy.
I always enjoy meeting young Chelsea fans because I like to describe to them exactly what a terrible, terrible place Stamford Bridge used to be back in the day. Certainly as an away. I mean, it's incredible the changes at Chelsea Football Club in just 3 decades because it was not a pleasant place to go as an away fan, and I don't think it was too nice for home fans, really, was it? It was a shocking place to play football.
To be fair, it's really interesting that people ask you now and say, "Oh, the players of today, it's totally different." I mean, in your day, they just kicked the ball long, and the pitches were terrible, and the stadiums were rubbish, and the conditions were awful. And I'm thinking, that none of that was my fault, I didn't cause that. I had to deal with that. I had to still. I wouldn't kind of be pointing fingers at me. I tell you a lovely little story that kind of underlines it rather brilliantly. We played, so the pitches we played on were not as flat and not as good, and you had to be skillful. Or if you were a skillful player, you had to do that in these horrible, sometimes bobbly, sometimes muddy, whatever pitches. And you watch the modern players, and I'm a complete and utter fanboy of David Silva when he was playing and Kevin De Bruyne. And it was a period when Spurs were playing at White Hart Lane, at Wembley. Remember when they were getting the new stadium done, and Man City came down to play against Spurs. But what had happened is the night before there had been an American gridiron game at Wembley. So the pitch was cut up. It was bobbly. They were going to have to play in one of our pitches. And I'm going, I cannot wait to see this. I want to see how they cope. And even though I love them dearly, those types of players, they just could not cope. They couldn't play in it at all. And there was this lovely little warm glow of, yeah, okay then, you keep on telling us about how brilliant the modern players are, but they couldn't cope with the conditions that we had to manage with. So, no, you deal with your own conditions at a time and you try and get as much joy and love of it. And yeah, there was horrible and ugly sides to it. But like everything, don't just look at the ugly sides of it. Remember there's beauty and love behind it. And there was that with every single football club.
Pat, I said that was my last question. There's actually one last question. It comes from Kieran, who wants to know if you've got tickets yet for the 40th anniversary of the Jesus and Mary Chain tour.
Ooh, can I whisper?
Yeah.
I went to one about a few years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, and I left early. And the reason being is they cleaned it all up.
Oh, really?
The reason why I loved them was because, it was the reason why I loved them because all the feedback and the fabulous noise. But it seemed very sanitized. And I've not become sanitized with my musical tastes. So if anyone was doing that, I would urge them to maybe try and find out if My Bloody Valentine are going to be playing, because they won't sanitize their sound. But, I'm sure it'll be a lovely gig, and good luck to the lads, and, get in there. But I'm afraid I might miss that one.
I remember leaving a Jesus and Mary Chain gig with a friend, and my friend saying, that's one of the best 25 minutes I've ever spent.
Yeah, I mean, one of the lovely things about the stuff that I've been writing, the books I've been writing in the last couple of years, is it's not just football. There's other things in it. I mean, I'm dealing with, the business side, like we are talking just now, the people you meet, the other interests. There's a huge musical side of it, and stories about, particularly the story about Morrissey and myself and Norman Whiteside and a guy called Vinnie Riley, which is a cracker. John Peel was a great friend. So being able to bring all this stuff and having a different type of life has been brilliant to write about. So I'll be honest with you, you've asked a music question at the end. My books could have all been music with no football if I'd have had my way. But I think people wanted to hear the football too.
And any interview I do that contains the words Vinnie Riley and Norman Whiteside in the same sentence automatically makes it a good interview as far as I'm concerned. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you, Pat. Thank you so much. We can't recommend your first book is fantastic. The latest book is brilliant. We can't recommend it enough, but it's been a joy talking to you, Pat. Thank you so much.
And thanks to both of you as well. Cheers.
And interestingly, he told us just after we stopped recording that the publisher sent back the chapters about what happened at Motherwell, saying you're making this up, and Pat had to convince him that it was all true. It was what a situation for him to find himself in, Kieran. This lovely little left-wing Joy Division fan, suddenly chief executive of a football club. It's fascinating to hear, wasn't it?
It is, and I think his ability to blend the knowledge of the boardroom and the expectations there with his experiences from the dressing room put him in a unique position. He's ridiculously modest because to do that job is a tough ask. And by all accounts, he did it professionally. He didn't create conflicts of interest. He was telling us about the manager and so on. It was fascinating, and the book is excellent as well. So don't get our book, get Pat's. I'll be perfectly frank with you. The only disappointing thing was the Baroness used to do the halftime draw at Tranmere Rovers when Pat was playing, and he didn't mention Tranmere once, so she's gutted. But apart from that, it was an education, and watching the interview when the fact that he's got Closer by Joy Division and Psycho Candy by the Jesus and Mary chain in frames over his shoulder just made me gave me a warm feeling all over.
Talking of warm feelings, I did not know the Baroness did the halftime draw. So she wheeled out the big drum thing, did she, and span it round and pulled it? Yeah.
Oh, you've seen her flogging the books at our live events. She's got a bit of patter.
She's a machine. She won't be happy to hear you say, buy Pat's book, don't buy our book. Yeah. So this also puts into a new light, Kieran, your revelation that you took her second date, or your second date, was at Tranmere Rovers. So you took her to a game at Tranmere Rovers where she does the draw at half time.
Well, she'd moved on from there,
okay.
because she lived on the Wirral, so she wasn't far away. But because her family was then working at Manchester United, she'd sort of switched allegiances, and I've spent the last many years trying to successfully convert her into being a Brighton fan.
I was interested, Kieran, as much by your reaction as Pat was saying this, as what Pat said when he says he has no issue whatsoever with the amount of cash that somebody throws into a football club. He said if they've got it and they want to spend it on the football club, there should be no limit on it. But what there should be a limit on is debt. He was very keen on that, but it's a slightly unexpected point of view, I thought, from Pat there.
It was, and it's intriguing. I absolutely get it that if an owner wants to put £500 million, £1 billion into a football club because they've got it spare, and they want to put that into the club in a form of in equity, I effectively get the club to issue shares. There are benefits for that. What that doesn't deal with, however, is what happens if the circumstances of the owner change. So in the case of Roman Abramovich, he whilst he nominally lent the club money, it was money he was never going to ask back. Chelsea went into a crisis. We've seen it with other owners who either their other businesses fail all of a sudden, and he was saying that in the case of Motherwell, or they've got the kids nagging the investor, this is our inheritance that's going down, and they say, right, I'm not prepared to put that new money in. You've got legacy contracts in terms of players and their financial rewards, which have to be dealt with by the next person. So you can be leaving behind a bit of a white elephant, in the sense that the club can generate £50 million a year. You've been subsidising it to the tune of £100 million a year, and does that mean that the next person will be in that position? So I absolutely understand where he's coming from. I don't have the same hostility towards debt. We've got clubs such as Spurs that have borrowed huge sums of money and used it really wisely. But I can understand from the perspective of financial fair play is there to preserve the cartel as much as anything else. And yes, it does have some benefits, but what's being ignored is that it's actually anti-competitive.
Thank you to everyone who has donated to the pod via our Patreon page. If you'd like to make a small monthly contribution to the pod and get access to our chat community and our regular quizzes, that'd be very kind of you. And you can do so by going to patreon.com/priceoffootball. If you have a question you'd like answered on the show, email us at questions@priceoffootball.com, and we will be back whenever our next pod is due. Because I haven't read the email either. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
The price of football. The price of football.